Okay, welcome back to the channel, guys. I'm joined today by Sevilla King. Sevilla, welcome.
Thank you. Nice to meet you.
Absolutely. Yeah, so as I told you offline, I'd like to get to know you a bit first and to introduce you to people listening to this channel. I think a lot of people will be familiar with you. But in any case, I'd be interested myself. So yeah.
In this little corner.
Yeah. So
Okay,
yeah,
so
where would you like to start? And again, you can share what you want to share. So you can go all the way back to your childhood, or you can just tell
well,
about your intellectual path. That's to your interest.
let me just talk about you know, uh, being in this little corner. Let me see what I can remember. So I think that well, of course, Jordan Peterson is sort of the linchpin, the initial linchpin in this little corner. So I think that I came into this. In fact, I'm pretty sure things just converged at the same time, right around when he became famous uh, to the public at large, not just someone that I pursued Jordan Peterson because he's a psychologist and I wanted to learn about certain concepts. So I pursued him as if he was a college professor because he did these great lectures on people I was interested in and people who I wanted to know more about in my own practice because I'm a therapist. So I wanted
Yep.
to know Carl Rogers. We were using a lot, I was working in an agency at the time, we were using a lot of Viktor Frankl. Um, and agencies deal with people who really are very poor and who don't have, and generally are many people who go to the agencies have a very hard time finding meaning in their lives because their mental illness prevents them from even working. So
Yep.
we were doing groups in terms of trying to find meaning and purpose and ways that people could transcend, not being able to completely fit into society because of sometimes very severe mental illness. So Viktor Frankl was very useful to us then. So I had seen a video of Jordan Peterson that had Viktor Frankl's meaning and something else in it that I was also interested. I think it might have been Jung. So just from that one video, he's so addictive. If you look
Yeah.
at his old videos,
Yeah.
he's very different now from when he was then.
Hmm.
Then it's like just the most amazing college professor. There's an addictive quality to his work. The same later that Vervaeke displayed in his own way that you just want to watch episode after episode. And so I went down that path at that time. And then all of a sudden, that thing happened in 2016 with C16. And then Paul Vanderklay got involved. So I started watching Paul. And that's pretty much, and Paul pretty much from those videos, of course, started, and Pageau was involved with talking to Jordan Peterson at that time. So that's sort of that's how the corner began. Vervaeke got involved a little bit later, and then it sort of came together. And there were certain people involved in the corner. One of them was Mary Cohen, someone who passed away a couple of years ago, who was a convert from. She was brilliant. She would go on Paul Vanderklay's channel a lot, and she was a very unitive spirit. So I think Mary had a lot to do with the corner developing.
Yeah.
She was a she had converted from what she called a cult, Jehovah's Witnesses, to being a very erudite scholar of Catholicism and a very devoted Catholic. And then, of course, Pageau's orthodoxy. I mean, um, these strains. So I got involved because I was trying to understand the work of Robert Pirsig. I didn't understand anything about it. And I
Yeah.
thought, and because the way it was back then, it was really, it was past the prime, I think, of YouTube, but still very dynamic. And I'm sure it is dynamic in some other ways now, but sort of in that Wild West, like
Yeah.
the little Western towns are now getting settled. Is kind of how it was. Then they have a saloon or whatever, they're
Hmm.
starting. So that was kind of this. So I wanted to go online and talk about Pirsig because I didn't see it anywhere. There was a few things, there was a site called Partially Examined Life that did one or two episodes on it, and they weren't very favorable. And then there was a book review, but there was so little on him. And so I just went on, very ignorantly to try to understand his work, and did these things where I tried to um, understand Zen and the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance. So I have a whole series. It's very outdated now, and I understand Pirsig much better than I did then. So it's outdated in a lot of ways, wrong, but it's still up there. And then I moved on to Lila, and during that, there was some convergence because Pirsig is an anti-materialist, let's say. As you know his work, and that anti-materialism strain is a big aspect of this corner. I mean, I understand that this corner has moved in the direction of maybe exploring different ways that Christianity can be integrated back into society. But at the time, this anti-materialistic aspect of it, I think, was part of it. So there was lots of points of convergence,
Yeah.
that connect with people like Vervaeke, people like Pageau, different ways of seeing reality. And of course, people like McGilchrist became influential. So that's really what happened. Now, lately, I haven't really done anything on the channel. I do a few. It's the 50th anniversary of Pirsigs, of the novel. And there's a really great organization called the Robert Pirsig Association. And they're doing all sorts of things to honor this year, very significant things. Like a bunch of people just did the whole, a couple of people did the in part, but they did the whole ride in cars and a lot of motorcycles from Minneapolis all the way to Montana. Was it beyond Montana? I'm not sure, but I can send you a link to that organization. They're doing a lot of good work.
Yeah, please do.
Yeah, and so I've been sort of, I'm very busy right now, but I've sort of been trying to host maybe some interviews with people on my channel who were involved in Pirsig's work in whatever capacity. And a couple of the people I've had on were involved in MOQ.org at the beginning of the 2000s, which was that whole philosophical, a lot of philosophy students trying to unpack the metaphysics of quality, because the Lila had been recently published, and so they were doing that, and Pirsig was still alive, so he was actually communicating with a lot of these people. So really, my only role right now is to, if I can, host some of these old, let's say the old guard, so some of their experiences can be brought back up. So that's really where I am with that right now.
Yeah.
I think through the whole process, I was able to really comprehend his philosophy. It was it was a tough thing to do. And I really made a lot of mistakes and got it wrong. And some people, there's the political division, and, Jordan Peterson is so, people feel some kind of way about him. So that was kind of ridiculous that everything had to feel like it was, either for or against whatever.
Yeah.
And that's been problematic. So, but that's really it. That's my story about my channel.
That's wonderful. And it's called Equality Existence, referencing
Yeah.
Robert Pirsig. I read a bit of your bio and your YouTube channel, but can you
Mhm.
elaborate why you call it Equality Existence?
Well, I think that if you understand Pirsig's philosophy, and you can, and this has come out in a lot of ways with people like McGilchrist, and there's a whole other consciousness corner, I think, that I follow with McGilchrist, with Bernardo Kastrup, with Don Hoffman, with those people who have this sensibility that it's quality first, it's experience first, and then you make your patterns after the quality, after you have the experience, versus just, having this idea of what things are first and then making things fit into it. So it was sort of a way of understanding that you can live in a sort of, you can live experience first and quality first.
Yeah.
Like you follow quality, you know, and if quality always shines forth and you get an innate sense of and you follow it and you can actually live that way and be okay
Yeah.
versus, you know, map out your certainty by determining what the patterns are and making sure you adhere to those patterns, if that
Yeah,
makes sense.
it does. I have a million questions, so I'm thinking where to start. I'll give a bit of background for myself, how I got into Pirsig,
Yeah,
and then it will
yeah,
give some necessary context. So I was listening a lot to Robert Breedlove a couple of years ago.
yeah. And you interviewed him, didn't you? He's
I,
great.
I did, yeah, yeah. And you did a series about his series, I believe, with Karen and with Ira. Is that correct?
Yeah, that's right. That's right.
Yeah. Okay. So that was the intersection between Jordan Peterson's Maps of Meaning,
Yeah,
Robert Pirsig's work, and then I think it was Austrian economics as well. So
yeah, that's
yeah,
right.
that was wonderful. I really liked that actually. Um,
Yeah, yeah. Ira was the expert in Austrian economics. We were trying to kind of converge those two things because he
exactly.
picked those three books, Maps of Meaning, Austrian Economics, and Lila, and that's because you know Bitcoin is a quality first currency, right? It follows the quality versus you know
What
mapped
so do
out.
you mean quality, if I may ask?
Well, the way I see it is it's a bottom up generation of you know it's like I think what he says is decentralized, right? It's a
Yes.
bottom up generation of currency that is available to everyone
Mm,
and that everyone has equal participation in, you know, just like quality
yes. Ah, I see.
is, you know, here's a certain amount and certain people win it through certain means and certain people don't.
Yeah. Yeah, exactly. Okay, I get it in that sense, yes. And
Yeah.
so to go back to the story, I'm listening to Robert Breedlove. I listened
Mhm.
to that series before. That was, I mean, I think 3 years ago. Um, and then I read Lila first. Uh,
Yeah. Are you talking about the series that he did with the, I forget his name, but
Mike
he's
Hill.
yeah, that
Yeah.
was really good. Yeah.
Yeah, that
Yeah.
was awesome. And
Mhm.
so that's when I started reading myself. But I started with Lila because that's the book that Robert has been obsessed with for a long time, which I think may be describable as a more explicit presentation of the theory of,
Mhm.
let's say, the metaphysics of quality. And it's still in a novel format, but I mean, a lot of it is written down like that, and that blew open a bit of my worldview, especially in terms of really giving it words. So Vervaeke helped with that, but this helped with that a lot because I felt that, um, for those who don't know, the metaphysics of quality, I think primarily consists of the static and dynamic quality. Am I correct in saying that?
Yeah, there's quality which there's static quality, dynamic quality, which you know evolved from romantic and classic quality,
Yeah.
and the dynamic, and then yeah that's it. Static quality are the patterns, and dynamic quality is the agent of change and growth and moving forward and
Mm-hmm.
like that, like almost the substrate that the patterns exist in, if you want to look at it in that way.
Yeah, exactly. And that for me, my wife is still annoyed when I use these words because I used it so much for a while. Where I was like, this applies to everything
Yeah.
in my life. And then it's funny because you start to look at this little corner, Jonathan Pageau, who always speaks about multiplicity and unity, and then Jordan Peterson with order and chaos, and another thinkers that describe the masculine and the feminine. And they're not all exactly the same, but they seem to be pointing to something for sure. Um, so I sensed a lot of truth in his work, and I just found out I made like 60 uh, notes on Lila that I forgot
Oh
about.
yeah,
So
yeah.
I had a bunch of things that really struck with me. Uh,
Mhm.
so yeah, that's just the background as to how I got interested in Persig. Then I
So
read,
you were interested in Bitcoin to begin with. That's what you started with.
yes,
Yeah,
yes. Let's say Peterson came before that even.
sure.
But that was Bitcoin was a whole side thing, but at some point it just merged with this little corner stuff, and now I'm not really thinking so much about Bitcoin anymore.
Yeah.
But it was a fun journey on its own.
Yeah, I can imagine.
Absolutely. And I think, like you guys pointed out in your series, there's a lot of conversion between Austrian economics, which in some way represents Bitcoin and the principles of that, and maps of meaning and Lila, and thus reality in a sense.
Mm-hmm.
Okay, so that's all the context. Now I have
Yeah.
some more directed questions. While you were speaking, I was thinking about how lately this idea of relationality has been very popular, viewing reality as relational. Vervaeke often speaks about Nathan Filler's book, who spells this out very explicitly. How do you see reality as relational relating to quality, if at all? I'm wondering.
Well, reality, as reality emerges, it is relationships. It can't be anything else, because quality, say you have the way things are. You've got patterns of uh, let's say in chemistry, you have something and it reacts to something else, and the reaction itself is dynamic and it creates another thing. So all things in existence are that. Like, you ask me a question, I answer the question, but there's a dynamism between our dialogue, like Vervaeke says, the dialogo. So that creates a third thing, that creates a new concept between two people that they never thought about, or changes the way they see things, or even makes them more sure of their position to begin with. So relationality is reality. It's always happening, and it moves reality forward.
Yeah.
The analogy, I mean, you probably remember the great analogy, which is timeless, which I always bring up because it's the best. I think one of the easiest ways to understand it is the trade metaphor, which means you have these static patterns that you take with you, static patterns of understanding, static patterns of biology, static social patterns that make you as a human being, because we're the combination of the three. And the substrate, of course, is the inorganic material that creates the physical world and our physical bodies that we live in. And as we go on the track of quality, that track is moving forward, and that is reality. It's always relating to quality, coming forward, meeting us. The track guides us on that
Yeah.
way. It's a relationship in that regard. And relationships are always, you have a sense of quality in every moment. And then you try to make sense of the world based on all this other stuff you already know, or all these other experiences you have. So everything that happens in front of you has to be a meeting of what you've got and the new thing. And this
Yeah.
is where Jordan Peterson comes in, because his whole map of meaning is you're moving forward. Quality, the better thing, is always taking you forward. And it's a relationship with that better thing.
Yeah.
And then it becomes a little complicated, because, well, no, it's not always a relationship with a better thing. It's sometimes a relationship with a worse thing. But that's kind of missing the point. The point is, even something that's bad that you want to move away from, that moving away from it is quality guiding you anyway. So it becomes complicated when you try to frame it as all good, right?
Yeah. I understand. That makes a lot of sense. And I wanted to dive a bit into this idea of a spiritual quest of some sorts, which I feel like, so let's say a couple years ago,
Mm-hmm.
this time that you were talking about with Jordan Peterson and these videos are so addictive and pulling us in. I think something had to do with it had something to do with us being also driven to something and feeling pulled towards something. And I think a lot of us sensed that there was something there in these lectures and for Vervaeke as well. And I feel like now in this little corner, a lot of people feel a bit more like they've arrived somewhere,
Mm-hmm.
as opposed to this really anxious looking and exciting in a sense as well, because a lot of people now explicitly are just Christian as well. And of course, that goes as well with some sort of quest, but
Yeah.
there seems to be a bit more rest there. And I was wondering how that is for yourself. Do you feel that since a couple of years ago, you're still searching as much as you were then? It's still as much of a quest, or do you feel like you've arrived somewhere as well?
Well, I don't know. Arriving somewhere, I mean, there's two ways to look at it. One is that you've entered an area that's better than where you were and more like at least stable to some extent. So in that regard, I'd say that's true. But the ultimate reality, I don't know if that's ever possible.
No.
And even, with a lot of the um, underlying uh, religious literature that informs, let's just say Vervaeke and Pageau. You have the church fathers informing Pageau, and you've got Neoplatonism informing Vervaeke, and they're both very similar because they have this thing, they have this essential concept that the one or God is inaccessible, but you're drawn towards that nonetheless, and that's the same as Pirsig's quality. There's a dynamism in that draws you forward. And if you follow the right path, if you don't get subverted with parasitic processing, John Vervaeke said, if you follow the quality path, the quality track, and don't get subverted, then that can be a very satisfying way of understanding. But it really requires a paradigm of understanding how reality actually works. And it's not just material.
Yeah.
And so I think that in that regard, becoming very aware of what that means, because it's very hard to get it if you were raised in a scientific materialistic world. And I certainly didn't believe any kind of religious or spiritual stuff at all for at least 2/3 of my life. I just believed in science like a lot of us are raised to believe. And then you understand that you're missing half the picture,
Yeah.
and that even takes you further in something like Neoplatonism, that maybe even our physical presence on this earth in this form isn't necessarily the ultimate reality that we'll experience.
Yeah. That's how I would feel about it as well. Um, so when you were speaking to John for the first time, at least online that I know of, you spoke also about the Tao in relation to quality and finding similarities there. And then you went on to speak about God as well with him. And I'm wondering how you view God as relating to quality. Another is that the same thing in your conception, or are those two concepts different?
Where am I now with that? I've got to think. Um, well, certainly that drawing forward by this unknown. I mean, I think that this is one big difference, and this is something that one of my friends who really understands Pirsig really well pointed out to me. He said, "This is Paul, who I've mentioned before, that that a religious worldview or Christianity tends to, and in the Metaphysics of Quality, you have these levels: inorganics, biological, social, and intellectual. The religion and Christianity tend to be a social way of understanding. So the ultimate reality is going to be embodied in some kind of person. God
Mm,
is a person.
mm,
But if you compare that and Neoplatonism, it's very similar. You just are not you and it's not worse that it's in the social level. It's actually more practical. What it's trying to do is, getting back to Christianity, is overcoming the religion of the intellectual, which is where we end up with scientism and all that stuff, and that division between the intellectual and the social. And so I think that in religion, when it's really productive, like the way Pageau does it, and the way Vanderplay is trying to investigate with people, that God is going to necessarily be some kind of social representation. It doesn't mean it's they're going to say it's different. I know that. In my conception, it isn't. This is where where I can't completely be a Christian, even though I think, I'm probably 85% or whatever you want to say.
Yeah.
That there's something in that ultimate good that is the same. So you could say that God and quality are the same thing. And even in Zen in the Art of Motorcycle Maintenance, he says something like the etymological root of all these words, good, God, and good God and something else, are they represent the same thing. So within us, they are that same thing.
Yeah.
So you've got, I think, these two divisions, these two characterological and temperamental divisions in people, and how they get there might be innate temperamentality, or it might be a socialization, but probably a combination of both, which I think is so well illustrated by Pageau's Christianity, which is the one I, relate to the most. And the Neoplatonism of Vervaeke, that God is ineffable. It's informing the world, but it will never, so they're so similar. It's just that, so for me, it's somewhere in between the two. But to me, they're very similar. But a Christian would say they're not, and a Neoplatonist probably would be more likely to say it is.
I see. I see.
Yeah, yeah.
So the reason that you're not fully there was because you didn't see the two as different. Is that what you're saying?
It's because I think that because Christianity operates um, with the social level at the
Yeah.
top of the hierarchy, um, and I come from, just the way I've born and raised and everything else, I'm more in the sequential, the interaction of all levels, but still informed by the intellectual level.
Yes.
I'm not, I mean, obviously, it's not cut and dry like that. Obviously, there's so much theology that's intellectually informed,
Wow.
but ultimately, one would capitulate to the social level in Christianity, whereas in something that isn't Christianity but very similar, such as Neoplatonism or some of the Eastern monistic traditions, you don't ultimately capitulate to a social level. You capitulate to the dynamic level.
Yes. Yes. And I feel,
Capitulate to dynamic quality, let's say.
yeah, exactly. And I think I've had a similar way of thinking throughout the years where I felt that I couldn't be a Christian because to me God was more like that, like more of the ineffable. Um, yeah, quality. I really like that one actually. I've been loving it for a couple of years, but I've been persuaded by the idea that Christ is sort of a personal. It is a way to connect to that in a personal manner. But I think where a lot of people go wrong is that they absolutize the symbol in a sense that it doesn't become a symbol anymore. So what I'm trying to find in that is that the symbol would refer beyond itself to that dynamic reality. So when I read the Tao Te Ching, for example, uh,
Mm-hmm.
I see the same thing. It's just that I think the personal layer gets added in Christianity, thereby allowing people to more easily perhaps um, connect to it. But then in reality, the way that it expresses itself comes with all sorts of problems, especially when it's layered upon upon materialism in the last 200 years, let's say. And then you start to be mistaken in a sense. And then the question is, okay, do you then still bind yourself to that tradition despite the materialist um, reduction of it, or do you find something whole else? Uh,
Mm-hmm.
that's a dialogue still going on in my mind. I'm not yet a churchgoer. I'm not sure if I will get there, but it's part of the hang up where I feel like the people that I'm talking to aren't seeing that dynamic reality.
Yeah.
They're seeing a man.
Yeah.
Um, so not to speak for everyone, but
Yeah.
it's what I get the sense of at least.
Or it might be, making a choice because you can, if you, I mean, as we are men, I mean, we are people,
Yes.
and we're not going to, in this iteration, we're not going to be anything but. So it makes sense on a practical level to choose that. If you're choosing the other thing, then maybe you're going into mystical territory that's not practical for holding your family together. And because,
Yeah.
when Pirsig had his break, it was like a total mystical experience and it destroyed his marriage.
Uh, yeah.
So with something like Christianity, you may be sacrificing a personal um, mystical quest for a greater good of your family and society, and that makes sense to me that people would choose that.
Yeah. And ideally you would have them align in some way that you could have not just the social, not just the intellectual, not just the mystical, but everything in one deal. But that seems to be a difficult. It seems to be a difficult endeavor in the modern world because I think that the East is almost completely unattainable for a Western person, and I think that it's hard to find that in modern Christianity. Not that it's impossible, but I think it's difficult.
Yeah, I think you're right.
Yeah, so that's where I'm also struggling. Okay, I will go back to some quotes because I will hit myself if I don't ask you some of these questions. So, Robert, he often refers to this quote, and he's brought it up in many conversations after, and I still don't fully understand it. But it's this idea of causality, which I'm sure you're familiar with, where in the Metaphysics of Quality, I'm quoting him now,
Mm.
Pirsig, that is. Causation is a metaphysical term that can be replaced by value. To say that A causes B, or to say that B values precondition A, is to say the same thing. The difference is one of words only. Um, it goes on for a bit, but I'm wondering if you already have a way to explain this to me.
Um, Causality implies very discrete patterns, that the the value paradigm means in a way that, let me see if I can, I'm sorry, it's going to, the value paradigm means in a way that there's a relationship between the two, and the relationship is more important than the discrete items that have to be defined in some kind of way. And the thing is, these discrete items can never be defined in some kind of way. Our perception of them changes all the time. Science changes all the time. Politics can take the same facts and make entirely different narratives out of them. So I think that valuing is more about what is, is a more pragmatic way of understanding causality, because it can vary depending on what the conditions are. The
Yeah,
way an object or discrete pattern is defined depends on the context much more, and sometimes the relationship between item A and item B is going to be quite different.
yeah.
And the problem with causality is it implies that things will always be this way, that
Ah,
it's always been this way,
yes.
and that there's no other way to understand it. And that causes a lot of arrogance, especially with things like science and medicine, where we think we found the answer. Now we see this causes that, of course,
Yeah,
the case closed.
yeah.
But if we forget that it's the relationship that heaven and earth are meeting, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
Okay, that makes a lot of sense actually. Thank you. That's been a long time that I've been wanting to ask someone this question that actually can answer it. So that's great. Um,
Well, that Pageau book, Language of Creation, really illustrates that well, I think, this, the meeting of heaven and earth, the
yes,
relationship.
absolutely. And visually as well, I like that a lot.
It's great. It's
That
great.
helped me a lot
Yeah.
for sure.
Mhm.
The book Lila, it ends with some sort of a conclusion and a realization
Mhm.
that good is a noun.
Mhm.
Um, what do you think that Pirsig meant with that realization that the good is a noun and not an adjective, I guess, or an adverb?
Um, well, everything that you can point to, everything that he said that all static patterns are what you can, are in the dictionary. So every word, and words, of course, create the item, at least in that particular, this in that particular mode of understanding. Every word is an item, and that has been created by quality, by some decision that that word or that item or that noun is, it means it's been created by quality. The quality relationship has resulted in this now. So whatever you see is created because somewhere, whether it's in the moment,
Mm-hmm.
an idea, fleeting idea that you have based on the quality, um, what he calls the quality event,
Yeah.
the subconscious trigger, the relevance realization
Mm-hmm.
will result in something. The relevance realization takes you to a way of trying to take that relevance and make it into a noun,
Yeah.
whether it's idea, whether it's something you're going to make in the kitchen, whether it's a piece of art you're going to make.
Yeah.
So within everything that can be named, it has been that relationship that caused it to be, using the word causality that made it happen.
I see. Yeah, that makes sense. Um, Another question I had was, now that you have spent so much time on Persig's work and you said you stumbled a lot through it and it was,
But yeah,
you know, a journey.
yeah.
Do you now also see some flaws in his work or things that you seriously disagree with, or do you feel like he's someone that you can really relate to in every way, in terms
Well,
of the ideas?
well, there's one thing that I have a hard time with, which is he has this model of evolution, and it begins with the Big Bang, and
Hmm.
I just can't buy the Big Bang. There's a timelessness, I think, that we don't understand, that we can never understand, which is goes back to that good that is ineffable. And if there's a Big Bang, that's the beginning of the universe, and I can't buy that.
So you because you think that there is a timelessness to reality.
Yeah.
So would that mean that there is no beginning of it?
I don't think there's, I mean, in the way I understand reality, I don't see how there can be a beginning or end. There might be a place where time does not exist.
Yeah.
There might be, um, a substrate, you could say, in which all reality comes from, but I don't think that time is even a thing in that
Yeah.
substrate.
That makes sense.
That's kind of influenced by, I guess, the physical model that I think, for me personally, seems to make the most sense is the ether model, right?
Mhm.
That there's the substrate of potential, and that's not a thing. It's not inorganic. It's not anything that exists. It's potential itself. You could say the ether, and from this come everything. And you could even say that this ether potential um, is quality in a way, because when that interacts with something, something is created.
Mhm. That makes sense. I think I agree with you in the sense that I think that, well, I think about reality in a layered manner, and I owe that to Wolfgang Smith. I don't know if you're
Oh
familiar.
yeah, yeah,
Karen
yeah,
Edelman.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. Right.
So in his conception, there's, let's say, three levels. Um, so we have our level with time and space, and then there's an intermediary level with time but not space. And then there's the highest level, the aveternal level, and that is without time and space. And then all being comes from that.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah. 100%. That really resonated with me too for the
as
same.
well. Yeah, beautiful. So in that sense, I completely agree with you. But then I'm thinking, our level where there is time and space, must that then not still have a beginning, or do you think that that works similarly as the highest level where there is no time and space? Because one of the reasons that I feel more comfortable with maybe not the Big Bang, but let's say a Genesis laying out reality. Um, it says that God did that, you know. So let's say the highest level or quality itself is responsible for that. So then maybe time is introduced, um, and I don't know if it could end in this level, but maybe it could. How do you feel about that?
Well, I mean, in our manifest reality, time is a thing for sure.
Yeah,
There's, but and what I really think the problem is, and this is, um, you know, these old religious texts tell us you can continue to try to figure out what this is, but you're never going to know.
yeah,
And I think that, maybe spiritual enlightenment to some extent is coming to terms with that. And I think that trying to figure it out, even, these are only descriptors of what this thing that we cannot conceive is.
mm,
So you can go as far as you can to the edge, and the ether model, I think, is the edge, or Wolfgang Smith's model is the edge, or Pirsig's quality is the edge. You can go to the edge of the expression of the ineffable one, let's say, or God. But you're never going to know, and you're always going to try to conceive of it within the limitations we have, which is materialistic in a way. I mean, which is we're here on Earth. We conceive ourselves as physical beings on the Earth. So, and time and space is essential to that. So that's the only language we have to try to understand it. So I think we're going to continue to try to understand it in those terms and never get there.
yeah,
So we really have to be comfortable and happy with the process of trying to understand it versus actually getting there. And because we think about getting there, because there's a beginning, birth, and then there's the end, death. So the beginning and end is like essential.
yeah.
It's the paradigm we see things through. So it's a paradox because we're always going to try to see it through that lens and never get there and keep doing it anyway.
Yeah, so we're so stuck in this paradigm that we cannot even conceive of being comfortable with
Yeah.
not getting to the
How can you be unless, and this is why I think spiritual practices indicate that the present is all there is, because that's the only way to reconcile um, no beginning, no end, infinity. That's the only
yeah,
way we can do it is by saying all there is this present moment.
yeah,
Otherwise, you're always going to be grasping to try to understand the origin and of it.
yeah. It also seems a more recent thing, I think, probably with this paradigm that we're trying to do this. And I think Pirsig wrote about that as well. I was just going through the quotes that this idea of like life being the meaning of life being figuring out, what this is
Mm-hmm.
all about and this and that. That's very much tied to this paradigm of like, okay, let's put a hypothesis and let's figure out the answer.
Yeah.
Um, so I myself, I've been in the space for a couple of years, but still, there's moments where I feel that I'm still quite materially programmed.
Mm-hmm.
Uh, I was wondering for you how that is, and if you've rid yourself of that, how you did that.
Oh no, I haven't.
No.
I'm materially programmed too. I mean, these ideas, these spiritual ideas, draw me forward, and I hope someday to be less so. But
Yeah,
it's really difficult.
yeah, it feels like an intrinsic part of me at this point. I'm trying to deprogram bit by bit, but then sometimes I listen to Pageau and I'm like, what are you actually talking about? And other times I'm like at the edge of understanding, like, okay, I
Yeah.
get it, you know? Um, but yeah, that's where I'm at. So I'm trying to, yeah, I guess get the symbolic worldview. I
Mm-hmm.
think that's a good way of describing it.
Oh yeah, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And so I'm trying to read a bit less nonfiction and such and more stories,
Yeah,
because still it's funny because we're speaking about all of these things, but we're still operating on the intellectual level a lot of the time. And so
sure.
um, I still, even with the conversations, I try to break out of that, but that's difficult because the medium itself often encourages propositional uh, types of conversations.
No.
But yeah, okay.
Like
So
Chris is really good on this. He says, use it as a tool,
yeah,
but understand that ultimate reality is the whole thing. It's holistic.
yeah, yeah, absolutely. I like Chris a lot, actually.
Yeah, he's great. And
Yeah,
and Pageau's, I mean, if the symbolic worldview, like you're saying, I mean, we're in a very fraught political time. Very weird. Pageau's really got it. He says this is the breakdown of all um, this is the breakdown of institutions and patterns. And as society tries to hang on to the idea that one of these sides is better than the other, what Pageau says is no, it's really like every major pattern of our understanding is breaking down because this is the end of the Enlightenment project. And that's far more predictive of the political and social environment than the
yeah,
uh, propositional analyses that all sorts of social scientists and political pundits put forth.
yeah. What do you think about that? What do you think about that breakdown? Is that something that is part of the process that has to happen, or is there a way in which we should try to stop it from happening, in a sense?
Well, Alan Watts once said something on one of his many many talks. He said that the Bodhidharma is the figurehead of Zen Buddhism, and the Japanese like to have a Bodhidharma bobble, that pushes down and comes back up and pushes down and comes back up. And what Alan Watts says is you want it up, it'll always come up, so you want it up 8 times and down 7. So I think that whatever happens, you may go into it thinking you're going to change the world, but you always have to push against what you see as bad. And it's going to be different it's probably going to be different for different people. It's in pushing against that maybe we're going to come up with something a little bit more up than down, right? So I don't think that the idea, and again, it goes into, thinking there's the materialistic way of understanding, thinking that some final solution is ridiculous.
Yeah,
Every single solution is going to create a problem.
yeah,
But moving in a direction, and this is why things like, becoming a Christian would be a very good thing, is that at least it gives you a moral framework.
yeah, yeah. I see.
Um, can you say the question again? I'm losing. I've lost the
Well, it
train of
was
thought.
about things breaking down and predicting that breakdown and whether or not we should do something to stop that, or whether
Oh, I
it's
think it's
natural.
necessary. Yeah, I think it's necessary to push back at that's in the nature without realizing that it's probably not going to work. But you have to have that relationship.
Yeah,
It's that relationship of back and forth of conflict that
yeah,
creates, these new things.
yeah. Okay, that makes sense. You just mentioned uh, morality a little bit, or at least you said moral order, I think. It brings me to the first quote that I pulled up from Lila that I wanted to learn more about. Um, This is page 49. Because
Uh-huh.
quality is morality, make no mistake about it, they're identical. And if
Mhm.
quality is the primary reality of the world, then that means morality is also the primary reality of the world. The world is primarily a moral order, but it's a moral order that neither Rigel nor the posing Victorians had ever in their wildest dreams thought about or heard about. I like thinking about morality, but I never thought about it like this. Can
Yeah.
you expand on this a little bit?
Well, what they're talking about is social morality. That's the morality that we roughly equate with morality, but every level has its own morality. You know, biological morality, like making species persist, is going to be very counter to social morality, which doesn't want people to do whatever it takes to make the species persist. You know, they want to put a cap on that. A lot of social the social biological conflict, which the Victorians are all about, is making sure that um, keeping biology in its place. And that's Regel. Everything that has to do with sex is bad and evil and all. And so every level has its own morality. That's not to say that so they all have to really work together for things to work properly.
Yeah.
But they have to necessarily also be opposing each other, because the Victorians were correct and that, like runaway sexual behavior is going to cause a lot of problems.
Mm.
So they're correct in that way, but they're also wrong in the sense that that the new order of after, what happens in that book is Pirsig says that after that this Victorian morality became so rigid that this heroic ideal came in direct conflict with the intellectual um, progress of technology. That you have all these machines that are going to flatten some kind of noble horseman.
Yeah.
And that's what the First World War did. And it just ended up in this horrible hell of chaos,
Mm-hmm.
like there wasn't any way to reconcile. So they went into a sort of nihilistic phase, and then dynamic quality exploded all over the place because that social order was dead. And so the new, and in Lila, the new, and this is still what we're struggling with, and it's sort of roughly the right and left political division, is you're struggling with social versus intellectual morality.
Yeah.
So when he's talking about the evolution of the moral order, that means that when life becomes out of the inorganic very early at the beginning, that means that it's overcoming all the rigidity of inorganic, and that's a moral progress. It's better. It's moving towards something more dynamic. So moral progress is always towards the dynamic, and you end up at the intellectual level. The problem is, and this is where the morality issue is suspect in this day and age, is that the intellectual and the social levels don't meet anymore. They're divided. And that's what our problem is.
Yeah.
That there's a schism between these two levels.
Yeah.
If the system worked properly in Pirsig's morality, then the intellectual ideas would inform all the way down, the good intellectual ideas.
Yeah.
And then the good ideas would support from above. And that's the harmony between the moralities, but the highest morality in Pirsig's system is the intellectual level. So that's the evolution of it. And in a way, that's true, because in the intellectual level, you have ideas about human equality, for example,
Mm-hmm.
which no one in this day and age could say is anything but the highest um, uh, moral notion.
Yeah.
And society has very frequently not been able to see that, and it's taken intellectual information for people to understand that.
Yeah.
It was Jesus and his ideas. I mean, he was directly communicating with God, let's just say dynamic quality, but his ideas of equality that he had to demonstrate to the masses that brought that into our understanding.
Yeah. I have a last question to end with. So I was, for a long time, I was under the impression that static and dynamic quality are best in a balance with each other. So an exact balance.
Mhm.
Should that be, you know, exactly a 50-50 relationship? Because I'm also thinking about linking this to other concepts like the masculine and the feminine, maybe the left and the right hemisphere type of thing. And for example, McGilchrist looks at that like the right hemisphere must be the master and the left hemisphere must be the emissary. What should that relationship be like optimally, or is that variable dependent upon the situation and what we are talking about?
Well, I think they have to work together. It depends on I mean, I think it depends on the circumstance,
Okay.
because if you need the left hemisphere to do something, the right here of the hemisphere is going to lay out the problem, and the left hemisphere will solve the problem in that
Yeah.
bandwidth. So it's an interaction and an interplay between the two. Of course, if you get too much of one for a while, it's going to start falling apart.
Yeah.
We have too much intellectual now, and it's falling apart. And the social is like the social is being um, you've got these patterns like and Pageau points this out all the time. You have these religious patterns that aren't going to go away.
Hmm.
But if you lose touch with the origin of these religious patterns, you start populating it with intellectual ideas. So you get very strange religions
Yeah.
that aren't based on the on substrate, on the evolution of the morality. It's cut off. It takes the pattern. The pattern's kind of unmoored from its origin, but it's still there. So it's got to make expression somehow. And that's why you get things like at the Olympics, very strange variation of the Last Supper.
Yeah. Okay. Clear. I'm gonna thank you for your time because as we're entering the end of our conversation, it was really nice talking to you. I learned a lot.
But you too. I mean, I don't fully. I mean, this is hard stuff. So this is just my own personal. These are my own personal understandings of these things. I
yeah.
don't think that I'm by any means the ultimate, expert on Pirsig. I think that, like I don't think I could have done what Mike Hill did. That was very sophisticated.
Mm,
What he did with that, and my understanding of Pirsig is a little different because he was going at it from the Bitcoin, trying to use Bitcoin as an informant of
yes.
that.
Yes.
But I just think that these are very interesting ideas that we're working on in this
Hmm.
corner. That hopefully this will inform um, a reintegration of these levels so we can actually operate in the world and things don't fall apart and we don't forget who we are. And we're really going to have to reconnect with nature ultimately, I think, is another thing I want to say, is that we're not connected with nature, and it's resulted in a really, we've intellectually broken off the lineage to the biological level and the inorganic level that is supporting us. So
Hmm.
we have essentially broken off, and this is resulting in so many environmental problems. Not just the climate change is what everyone talks about, but they're far more severe problems, I think,
Yeah.
with our relationship with the planet and the world and animals, and it's terrible. And hopefully a reintegration um, of all these of our origin and getting back to the beginning. And that's what Persic was trying to say, in a lot of
Hmm.
ways. You can't cut anything off. It all works together.
Yeah. Absolutely. It's a beautiful place to end it.
Yeah.
Thank you so much for your time.
All right, Lucas, thanks so much.
Thank
And
you.
I'll see you next time.
See you.